All thoughts and opinions expressed on WRHU's Queerly Informed do not reflect the views of Hofstra University, the Board of Trustees, or Radio Hofstra University. All contrasting thoughts or suggestions can be sent to programming at wrhu.org or to room 127 Herbert Hall, 111 Hofstra University, Hempstead, New York, 11549.
Welcome to the second installation of Season 3 of Queerly Informed.
I'm Camryn Bowden.
And I'm Matt Fisher.
And we'll have all the latest in international, national, and local LGBTQ news.
The Burkina Faso Parliament outlaws homosexual practices.
Pope Leo meets with Catholic LGBTQ advocate Father James Martin.
Senator Rand Paul claims CDC official, quote, has no business being in government.
And more.
In Queer Entertainment, I'm Bryana Neff, with more on New York LGBTQ Film Festival, the 7th season of Drag Race UK, and a young Sheldon star coming out as non-binary.
For Gay History, I'm Riley Horvath. We have more on the first appearance of the Lesbian Avengers. Stay tuned to find out more.
For your Queerly Informed Sports Report, I'm Summer Savaria with more about the activists who are discouraging a popular homophobic chant ahead of the 2026 World Cup.
Thanks for joining us today. Let's get into the headlines. The African country of Burkina Faso's transitional parliament has passed legislation prohibiting conduct designed to promote LGBTQ practices. As part of the new law, the government can issue fines, prison sentences, and sanctions for those convicted of breaking the new law, that all according to Burkina Faso's justice minister. Following a 2022 coup by the Burkina Faso military, the new parliament has become far less supportive of dissent amidst Islamist militant violence. The law is now awaiting the signature of military junta leader Ibrahim Traoré and will mark Burkina Faso as the latest African nation to criminalize LGBTQ+ identities. So at this point, there is 32 out of 54 countries in Africa, the largest continent by amount of countries, and there's 32 of them that have outlawed or banned LGBTQ+ identities. And I mean, the first kind of question that I draw from that is, how do you outlaw LGBTQ+ identities? I mean, it's not something that's always very visible. I mean, sometimes there are people who are very visibly queer, and that's wonderful, and that should be accepted and loved. But there's also people who are not very out and visually and openly queer, So it just seems sort of like meant to target people who are like very outward and open, which obviously like that's the intention here. People don't want openly queer people. You know what I mean? They don't want visibly queer people in society right now because of whatever antiquated and horrible beliefs they might share and might have. But like, I don't understand sort of like actually how this is put into practice, because it's like, how do you outlaw like a queer person? Like it's not like it's visible every single time,
It's probably a reporting system, honestly. Kind of similar to, I don't want to say like the Red Scare, but I feel like it could be something similar to that, where you see two men holding hands in the street, two women holding hands in the street. But also, I think the real danger comes too is from false allegations. Mm-hmm. What's stopping somebody from claiming somebody they don't like is homosexual, That could be a really big danger.
I mean, even more so than that, trans people are even like worse treated in Africa. I mean, more than half of the continent doesn't, outlaws transgender identities, and like you cannot change like your gender identity marker and anything like that, which is so silly because Africa does have a really beautiful and wonderful history of like queer and non-binary and trans people. So it's just like it's trying to remove like this past, you know what I mean? It's just like kind of rough.
Yeah. I feel like this is a story I hadn't even heard about before we talked about it today. And I feel like a lot of times people might pass up a story like this because it's in Africa and not in Europe or the Americas or like one of the more developed countries. And they might think, oh, like that's sort of par for the course there. But I think that we should definitely take note of the fact that there is a lot of history in Africa of like a lot of queer history there. And it's important to remember that like injustice anywhere is a threat to all queer people around the world. And this is definitely not something that we should ignore or pass to the wayside because of where it's happening.
Pope Leo XIV says he plans on continuing Pope Francis's policy of inclusion for LGBTQ+ parishioners. During a recent meeting, American priest Father James Martin, one of the Catholic faith's most outspoken LGBTQ+ advocates, said the new pope confirmed the church would remain open to all. In a post to X, Martin wrote he was, quote, moved to hear the same message I heard from Pope Francis on LGBTQ+ Catholics, which is one of openness and welcome. The 64-year-old priest continued, writing, I found Pope Leo to be serene, joyful, and encouraging. Leo's tenor comes after the death of Pope Francis in April. Francis was regarded by many as one of the most progressive popes, especially in the eyes of the LGBTQ plus community, as he made history as the first pope to publicly support same-sex civil unions. Yeah, I mean, I think it's super important that somebody of this religious stature is, outwardly supporting, the queer community. Obviously, faith and sexuality in the community are always kind of at arms, especially in the news and in the eyes of certain political parties. So it's nice having such an important religious figure kind of combat all of that and try to unify everybody. Because at the end of the day, as a Christian myself, the point of the religion is to bring people together and not drive people apart. And today, I think that's the main issue with, Christianity as a whole, and that's including all other denominations of the religion. So it's really nice to see him, continue Pope Francis's legacy.
That was a good point, Matt. I think that, even talking about, continuing from the last story about, talk about, Islamic militant violence, the point of most religions, like you said, is to bring people together, not to drive people apart. And that, when people use these religions as, we see it so often that these religions are weaponized against queer people. And I think that, Pope Leo the 14th using it as almost a weapon against homophobia is, I enjoy it. It's inspiring to me, at least.
Yeah.
But I just think it's important to kind of use it in defense as well as what people usually use it as, which is in offense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of, queer people are almost afraid to explore their faith today because of, I think criticisms from both parties. I think criticisms from the gay community being like, oh, those people are built against us. Why would you ever consider exploring that? And then Christian people who still don't believe that we have, a place in the church. But ultimately, everybody has a place in the church at the end of the day. And so this is just an example of some progression in an era of a lot of regression, is what I would say.
Kentucky Republican Senator Rand Paul says that an employee who worked with the Centers for Disease and Control had, quote, no business being in government because of his lifestyle. Former director of the CDC Center of Immunization and Respiratory Diseases, Demetrius Delaskius, who is gay, resigned alongside other CDC officials over Health and Human Services Secretary RFK Jr.'s handling of the CDC. Paul, who is notoriously anti-LGBTQ+, says that Delaskius' risky lifestyle made him unfit to serve in his role. He went on to further say, quote, he does not represent the mainstream of anything in America, and, quote, he brags about his lifestyle, the whole idea of bondage and, multiple partners and all that stuff. He brags about that stuff, but he's got no business being in government. It's good riddance.
This situation to me is very reminiscent of what happened during the Lavender Scare, where very qualified officials in government were removed from their positions specifically because they were queer, and it wasn't necessarily out loud. In the beginning, much as this is a resignation.
I think looking at this kind of, I almost hesitate to say point from Rand Paul, because it's not even a point. It's not even a coherent point. It's purely just saying words at the wall and just hoping something sticks. He brags about the idea. Saying he brags about the idea of bondage and multiple partners. These aren't queer things you're naming. This is an adult's healthy sex life that you're talking about, and that you are shaming another person for having. And I think that it's the most recent in a long list of examples of just throwing things at the wall against the queer community, hoping something sticks, hoping that it drives into a deeper point. But if you actually look at it, it's the most surface level, childish insult of just wow, you love somebody. Cool. That's not an insult. I think that it's saying that he doesn't represent the mainstream of America. He works for the CDC, so I don't know if he really needs to represent me in any way. I just want him protecting me from disease. So I don't know if I really care what he does in his personal life. And just this childish insulting, we have to let it not work and not affect us in ways that they want it to affect us.
Yeah, honestly, I think for both sides of the party, I think a lot of personal stuff gets brought up when it comes to any type of election season, any type of government position. And so there's got to be a line, though, of what personal information is valid when it comes to, maybe exposing someone being a little bit corrupt or somebody not being fit for a position, and then kind of like this, what's just completely out of left field that doesn't ultimately matter. So it's kind of a weird gray line in between on that one.
And honestly, it's kind of funny that Rand Paul thinks that he represents the mainstream of America, considering he takes such far right positions. Often, I mean, he takes very, very conservative beliefs, and that doesn't represent the vast majority of Americans. The majority of Americans are independents who have differing political opinions on basically everything. So it's funny that he thinks he's representing the mainstream here. Next up, we have our entertainment and history reports with Bryana Neff and Riley Horvath.
New York's annual LGBTQ Film Festival has announced that they'll be providing free viewing to citizens of Arizona following the cancellation of the Desperado Film Festival in Phoenix. The event, which highlighted queer films, was canceled by Paradise Valley Community College in direct response to an executive order issued by the Trump administration that axed DEI initiatives for publicly funded institutions. The college has cited fears that holding the event would, quote, jeopardize the district's federal funding, including student financial aid and grants that support over 300 positions on campus. In an effort to empower queer voices, the New York Film Festival Executive Director Dan Hatkoff has collaborated with the Desperado Film Festival's creators to create the Arizona Queer Film Access Initiative, which will allow Arizonians to watch over 100 short films for the duration of the festival. The 7th season of Drag Race UK is approaching, and with that comes the announcement of the season's celebrity guest judges. The season will include 4 recurring judges, those being Michelle Visage, Alan Carr, Graham Norton, and of course, RuPaul herself. Each week, a different celebrity guest judge will appear on the show alongside the others. Several judges have appeared as guest judges before, including British comedian and television personality Joel Dommett, as well as singer Nadine Coyle from the Irish pop band Girls Aloud. Several judges will be making their Drag Race debut, including Derry Girls actress Jamie Lee O'Donnell, West End star Maz Murray, writer and comedian Michelle De Suarte, and many others. The date of the season premiere is expected to be announced in the coming days, and fans in the UK and beyond will get to experience another fabulous season of the world's most famous drag competition. Reagan Redford, cast member of the popular sitcom Young Sheldon, recently came out as non-binary during an interview with Entertainment Tonight. Reagan Redford, who portrayed Sheldon's sister Melissa Cooper on the show, appeared on Entertainment Tonight to discuss their debut novel, a sapphic romance titled Rules for Fake Girlfriends. During the interview, they said, quote, growing up, whenever I would see a celebrity come out as non-binary or queer, I would think, this is so cool, I see myself in you. For your queerly informed entertainment break, I'm Bryana Neff.
This week in Queer Past, the Lesbian Avengers appear for the first time. September 9th marks 33 years since the lesbian activist group, the Lesbian Avengers, held a public demonstration in support of the rainbow curriculum in New York City's public grade schools. This demonstration was a result of weeks of planning and recruiting, consisting of an all-lesbian marching band and lavender balloons for children and their parents with the phrase, "Ask about lesbian lives," printed on them. This march took place in Queens District 24, as this was where opposition to the new curriculum was most prevalent. The rainbow curriculum consisted of the inclusion of gay men and lesbians when teaching about diversity in elementary schools. The Lesbian Avengers were a nationwide activist group with 35 different chapters, and they were known for their attention-attracting demonstrations aimed at bringing awareness to the issues present in lesbian lives. For your queerly informed history lesson, I'm Riley Horvath.
Thank you to Bryana Neff and Riley Horvath for those reports.
Welcome to this week's Trans News Break.
Following the fatal school shooting in Minneapolis at Annunciation Catholic School, White House Counterterrorism Director Sebastian Gorka was corrected by CNN anchor Breonna Taylor after reporting incorrect data regarding trans-identifying school shooters.
Gorka falsely included 3 school shooters in his data that were cisgender people. Taylor responded with pointing out these false claims and sharing the statistic that 96% of perpetrators in school shootings between 2016 and 2020 were at the hands of cisgender men.
In response to Kalar, Gorka claimed CNN to be an inaccurate source and said Kalar's data was, quote, fake news.
Graham Linehan, a comedy writer in Britain, has been arrested following a post he made in April on social media platform X, in which he incited physical violence onto trans women.
Linehan encouraged his followers to, quote, punch trans women if they were seen in public restrooms and public authority failed to stop them. This post comes after the UK's Equality and Human Rights Commission decided that trans women are to be excluded from women-only spaces, including sports teams and restrooms.
His arrest sparked debate both within the UK and the US about free speech. Linehan made the claim that the UK is shifting towards totalitarianism, an opinion that was supported by author and anti-trans activist J.K. Rowling.
24-year-old Boise State University senior Lindsay Hecox has decided to withdraw her case that challenges Idaho's ban on transgender athletes.
She withdraws her case after 4 years, citing worries over increased public hate and that she is concerned with her academics and personal safety being at risk.
A similar case in West Virginia involving 6th grader Becky Pepper Jackson is set to be heard by the High Court sometime next year, after it was ruled last year that Pepper Jackson's ban was in violation of Title IX.
Following the passing of a bill last Wednesday banning trans people from using locker rooms and from being incarcerated in facilities using their gender identity, Republican Governor Greg Abbott is expected to sign a bill banning trans people from using public restrooms.
Any government agency or public institution found to be in violation of this bill will have to pay a first offense fine of $25,000 and a $125,000 fine for a second offense, making this bathroom bill the most financially punitive in the nation.
Those opposing the bill have stated the dangers the trans community will face, pointing out by putting it into law, Texas will be codifying fear and misinformation about the trans community, leading to an increase in violence and harassment towards trans people.
Malcolm Gladwell, author of The Outliers, has gone back on his support for trans women in sports, claiming he was, quote, cowed into his previous statement of support at the 2022 MIT Sloan Sports Analytics Conference.
Writer C.B. Huckabee and MSNBC analyst Tim Miller were amongst those who spoke out against Gladwell, accusing him of seeking validation and changing his mind to reflect what is, quote, en vogue at any given time.
Gladwell's change in opinion is reflective of a recent trend in political ideology, as seen in California Governor Gavin Newsom and former Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. So one of the things that obviously stood out to me is that first story with Sebastian Gorka and really just the Trump administration in general trying to falsify and publicize information about trans people that's just genuinely false, and it's just not accurate to the actual information and the actual statistics and data. In terms of this school shooting, I'm really not surprised that they're trying to play up that trans people are, are scary and they need to have their guns taken away and they need to have their weapons taken away because they can't be trusted and all this kind of stuff, which, funnily enough, President Trump has put out like a plan to try and take away all trans Americans' guns. And the National Rifle Association came out saying they do not support it because they think that the Second Amendment is so crucial that every American should be able to have access to weapons, which personally I don't agree with. I think that no one should necessarily have, access to weapons because this is like weapons of the size and caliber that are used in school shootings and massive, events where that happens. But even the NRA, one of the more conservative elements in this country that's like foundational in terms of the gun rights and gun activism, like counter movement, right, is not in support of this. So it's just like, it's just kind of a showing that like, what it's showing is that special interest groups they really only care about their special interests, you know what I mean? Because if the NRA was any more conservative, I'm sure that they would support this, but they're really only conservative about weapons and gun legislation. So I'm not surprised that they're coming out to like support trans people still having access to weapons, because the minute you take guns away from one group of people, they take it away from everyone, right? And that's just like the slippery slope. But the fact that the Trump administration is actively publicizing and like trying to make data that is not true and that's falsified to the public on major, mainstream news is just really devastating, because it's only going to continue to make the mainstream America hate trans people more and more. You know what I mean? And especially when it's false information. Like, if you were starting to publicize that 50% of all school shootings are committed by trans people, that's going to make people hate trans people a lot more than, the fact of the matter, which is like, what, 5.6% of shootings are perpetrated by trans people over the last 10 years out of 5,500 events. I think that was the statistic we quoted last week. Like, that's just, it's so stupid and it's so dumb.
I think also you need to be aware of a double standard, right? Why is it that the act of a small portion of the trans community is a representation of the entire trans community, whereas with other groups, an isolated incident is not a reflection of the entire group? I think that's where the true issue lies. But also, kids died. Children were shot and were killed. That's the main issue here. And the fact that people are trying to turn this into a situation about the queer community that doesn't matter. That shouldn't be a part of this. Children are getting gunned down in this country, in churches, in schools, and that's the biggest issue we're facing.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like there's a lot of like fear mongering with trans people, like, oh, they're so scary, they're so violent. And we see that not just with school shootings right now, but also with bathrooms, one of our other stories. There's so much fear about using public bathrooms and a trans person possibly walking in. Personally, like, first of all, are there any like actual recorded cases of trans people being violent to specifically women in bathrooms? Because that's like most people's main concern. I haven't heard of any stories of that happening. If anything, it's been cisgender men walking into women's bathrooms and hurting women. So I don't get why I've never felt unsafe thinking that there's possibly a trans person in the bathroom. Like, they just gotta do what everybody else has to do. So all of this fear and fake information about or taking one incident and blowing it up is just hurting the trans community so much and creating so much unnecessary fear.
I mean, another piece that kind of ties with this bathroom thing is like that there are incidents where, you know, there are not queer people or there's not trans people, getting attacked like as a result of this, you know, and it's like, it's not fair because, you know, it is not accurate to like the actual situation. You know what I mean? Like, trans people aren't supposed to be scary. They're not scary. I mean, we have a majority of trans people on our staff. And this is just to say that I think that, you know, having visibly, you know, trans people in public is like not a scary thing. And on top of that, the enforcement of things like a bathroom bill is just so impossible because a lot of the time you can't even like identify a trans woman out of a lineup of like cisgender women versus trans women. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like a non-issue, but it's like the Republican Party needs to have something. Far-right activists need to have something to pinpoint so that they can get other pieces of their agenda out. You know what I mean? And that's why we're seeing such a rise in far-right activism within this country, is because one issue leads to a snowball effect of other issues becoming relevant and becoming mainstream and becoming normalized, which is not fair and accurate in any capacity. Before we end off our show, here's Summer Savaria with your Queerly Informed Sports Report.
Many are outraged at the Mexican Football Federation for their inaction against a homophobic chant fans have been yelling during national team matches. Local LGBTQ activists are trying to appeal to local fans to stop using the chant before next summer's World Cup. The chant, a one-word slur that translates to male prostitute in Spanish, was first used in the 2014 World Cup in Brazil, where it was faced with fines costing over $100,000 that were ineffective in stopping fans from chanting it whenever the Mexican national team was down in points. The continued use of the chant has worried many local LGBTQ fans, especially when it was announced that Mexico was hosting 13 matches in 3 of its biggest cities during the 2026 World Cup. One such city is Guadalajara, capital of the state of Jalisco, where the chant seemingly originated during a 2004 Olympic qualifier match between Mexico and the U.S. Andoni Bello, an LGBTQ activist in Mexico, has now moved from asking the federation to asking fans to stop the chant, saying, quote, "I'm concerned about the violence expressed in stadiums, which is invisible and anonymous. This normalized violence perpetuates homophobic hate crimes in this country. It seems very drastic, but it's real. If we think nothing's happening, we're perpetuating it."
Male prostitute is such an interesting way to call somebody a homophobic slur. I don't know. I mean, that just stuck out to me as kind of, I mean, maybe it's different in Spanish, but in my mind, I think I'd almost laugh at that a little bit. But also, if it's a big group effort by the entire stadium, that's crazy messed up.
I mean, yeah, I think that like using homophobic slurs in general is like you're right. It's like a weird way of saying it, but like it obviously does carry a lot of, you know, kind of weight for certain people. And with the FIFA World Cup happening in North America next year, like trying to crack down on this now is really, really smart. I mean, I think this is so unconnected, but it's like a similar situation where it's like with President Trump's efforts to get certain states to redistrict their, you know, their congressional districts so that they can have more like Republican seats in the House of Representatives, starting early to try and counter that is so much more smart than just trying to do it in the moment. You know what I mean? Because I think what happens is like, specifically if we're trying to like crack down on the use of this word or if it's anything like this, like going and waiting until next year to be like, we need to stop using this word, like as these massive, massive games that draw people from all across the world are happening, like that's not going to do anything. So working now to try and affect change is really, really important.
Something I didn't talk directly about, but his Andoni Bello, he is currently working with a couple organizations in Mexico to completely go around Federation, the Mexican Football Federation, and talk directly to teams and fan clubs to kind of create workshops so that fans kind of learn more about the history of that word and the like true impact of what they're saying, because he wants that, he and many others want that word to stop being just thrown around as a football chant before their country is represented on this global stage. I mean, the FIFA World Cup, it's one of the most viewed just events, period, in the world every single time. In trying to get ahead of it and going to these fan clubs, I think that's a smart way of getting around it.
I think it's really interesting that he did have to go to the fan clubs, though, and I think it's reflective of a broader issue where we see time and time again institutions failing the queer community and failing to address issues properly and punish those who create those issues. And it just kind of creates the feeling that institutions aren't there for you, so you have to go to the people that are the issue.
For your Queerly Informed Sports Report, I'm Summer Savaria.
Thank you for tuning into Queerly Informed this week here on 88.7 FM Radio Hofstra University, Spotify, YouTube, and iTunes. Thank you to the entire Queerly Informed team for your work on this week's edition.
Join us back here next week to hear the latest in queer news, as well as commentary from our group of LGBTQ reporters.
As always, if you have any suggestions for stories or content that you would like to hear, send them our way through email at queerlyinformedwrhu@gmail.com.
Thank you again to our entertainment reporter today, Bryana Neff, our historian, Riley Horvath, and our sports reporter, Summer Savaria, for their work on today's show.
For Queerly Informed, I'm Matt Fisher.
And I'm Camryn Bowden.
Thank you for tuning in.